sought information for a living. That is to say that ever since he returned from Korea, after having served with the armed forces, he had been working as a private investigator in Montreal. William Hamilton, a rich industrialist, had gotten in touch with him regarding a simple vandalism issue. Nothing to write home about. Not worth hiring a private eye either, just so he can drive for hours on rough roads. But that's how it had always been. The client pays, Carl gets it done. They had set up to meet at the general store, his client's business. Well, actually, the entire village had William Hamilton's name written all over it. When the roads were bad, muddy, or snowed in, it was customary around these parts to close them off. But it was also customary to ignore those signs entirely and drive there anyway. Emperor Duplessis, in spite of his conservative agenda, did a good job in colonizing the rural north, which helped to re-establish the region as an integral part of the province of Quebec. The blue fleur-de-lis could be seen fluttering in the wind here and there, taunting the red Canadian flags on the other side of the province's boundaries. Hamilton never mentioned a road-blocking barrier. Why was it needed here in the back of Beyond? That would, however, be a mystery for another day. Carl had waited long enough for someone to come and raise it. Hamilton is waiting for Carl in the general store. It was time for him to get down to business. William Hamilton enjoyed a lavish country house built in the very heart of the northern forests, not too far from here. The local populace was divided when it came to the affluent man. Some saw a wealthy philanthropist dedicated to improving the region's economy. Others an aging Englishman who would do anything to further his fortunes. And those ones hated him enough to go on about scheming against him. Hamilton had recently acquired a few local businesses, but the last straw was the reopening of a mine, which gave rise to a wave of protests and threats from the Cree people. Given these circumstances, Carl reckoned that a good number of people must be feeling compelled to oppose Hamilton in one way or another. So far, only the industrialist's house had been a target, but soon enough, Carl thought, the target would become the man himself. Carl needed to get out of there. The cold and the pain required urgent care. The driver had taken off. It was still best to check it out and leave nothing to chance. Carl needed help. Scratches did not stop Carl. His mother would be so proud. This deep in the country, his last hope was to find an abandoned garage. Or a farm by the roadside. His life depended on it. It was so cold. Already Carl did not feel his toes anymore. A fire can't be started with a snap of the fingers. Even better than he had hoped. Carl Faubert had succeeded once more and was now on his way to new adventures. The cold was burning Carl. He would not hold up much longer. He had to warm himself. Carl's scout training was buried deep in his memory. What do you need again to start a fire? Spread out on a few acres of untouched forest, bellowing caribou, everlasting snow, and undefiled lakes, the Manistan region was no tourist hub. It was said to have been populated for millennia by Cree people, and ever since the industrial era, by the metal mining industry. Carl's military training had made him a very punctual man. Being late to his meeting with Hamilton was out of the question. The truck was running on fumes. Good thing that the general store was close by. Surrender their divine nectar so easily. In all likelihood, they had to be switched on from inside the store. A milkman had to drive by every week to fill the bottles. The fresh milk indicated a recent visit. Something fell to the bottom of the box. Carl had no trouble recognizing his employer. He had been killed. There was no need to be a detective to figure that out. But only a detective could have noticed that the killer had to have been very close, that the fatal blow had been given before the victim even realized. Carl felt a chill down his spine and had a terrifying realization. If Hamilton was dead, then who was going to pay him? The note explained that the garage and the store couldn't be supplied with electricity at the same time. Wolves. always stay away from populated areas. Wait, was it about bears? The snowstorm pummeled everything in its path. Carl was not surprised when he heard no tone. Carl knew that Gilles Lachance was in charge of the general store. That made him one of Hamilton's employees. A very angry employee, as Carl could plainly see. The note explained that the garage and the store couldn't be supplied with electricity at the same time. According to that log, it seemed like the whole village owed some money to the general store. Carl was far more interested in the bunch of nearby addresses he had just gotten his hands on, though. A radiator without power is as good as a wood stove without logs. Ground? That was a first. Carl, ever diligent in his work, always carried his log on him, in which he scribbled down thoughts and leads alike during the course of his investigations. Carl felt that the store and its surroundings still held their secrets, and he didn't like to miss out. Carl wondered what the hell could that thing be. It looked like a man fossilized in ice. The Polaroid, Carl's long-standing and faithful ally, had seen his share of husbands caught red-handed cheating. There's always something out there waiting to be snapped away. The air air was freezing, right down to the bone. The otherworldly ice had struck again. The woman's hopes and dreams were frozen in eternity. Something was hidden under the stairs. The man grabbed his rifle. Carl felt a sense of dread in him. Carl felt the cold slowly dissipate and was brought back to reality. Giselle was now only ice, and all that was left of her voice was a diary. She confided in this diary, amongst other things, the tragic story of a young woman, a victim. Was this what she was hiding? Carl had seen that kind of safe before. With its double-layered security system blending letters and numbers, its code couldn't be broken by the common burglar. Ah, moving. What a pleasant activity. Of course, you'll find the record player only to find the records weeks later in some random box. The general store, along with several more infrastructures in the area, had been acquired by wealthy industrialist William J. Conventional Love. What a mess! Clearly, there was some major revamping work underway here. The place looked barely habitable. The cross looked after a marriage's well-being and served as a motivator to uphold the priest's sermons calling for more little worshippers on one hand, and cautioning against guilty pleasures on the other. Indeed, the Lachances were still part of the God-fearing generation. Many boxes scattered about. Carl didn't need to summon his detective training to quickly figure that the Lachances had just moved in. That window had seemingly been left open for a while, Carl thought. Given the punishing weather, it couldn't have been intentional. The pot was cold, and the stew inside wasn't cooked. It's likely that poor Giselle was slow cooking it before she got snapped. What a waste. Looks like the holes in that puzzle are there to stay. What could be inside that envelope? Carl was taken aback. He knew this address. It was said to be the address of the P.O. box for the Canadian Secret Service. Boxes scattered about. Carl didn't need to summon his detective training to quickly figure that the Lachauses had just moved in. Moving. What a pleasant activity. Of course, you'll find the record player only to find the records weeks later in some random box. A shiver ran down Carl's spine as he glanced over another body trapped in ice. Indeed, the scene was quite chilling. Carl felt familiar shivers going down his spine, and he was back to the realm of visions. To all appearances, this was a hunting log. Better yet, a war diary. The vision slowly faded away, like an icicle melting in the palm of your hand. Carl, back in the real world, now knew who the icebound man was. Gilles Lachance, the general. murder weapon. What was that doing there, Carl wondered. Hamilton must have been determined to keep some information secret to post this key. Shame he got unlucky. Everything made sense now. Poor Hamilton's denunciation was interrupted, and he figured it would be best to lock everything up and send the key to his correspondent, who would receive the box later on. Clever, but not enough. That's what happens to ordinary people playing spy. Leaving with an empty tank would be a death warrant. Carl had to refuel. The pumps wouldn't surrender their divine nectar so easily. In all likelihood, they had to be switched on from inside the store. At long last, the crowbar was within Carl's grasp. Surely it would come in handy at some point. Carl was beginning to know the store and its surroundings like the back of his hand. The seeker had sought. The track was fresh. That meant the car sunk down just a little while ago. Now where the hell could the passengers possibly have gone? Someone must have dropped this in a hurry, but whoever did was heading into the woods. Carl's tracking instincts were quickly kicking in. Carl knew why he was suddenly shivering. He was going back to the realm of visions. Carl had no issue recognizing the spirit-like figures, but he couldn't figure out what they wanted from him. The phantom, freed of reality's shackles, vanished in the forest. Earlier, Carl had witnessed a tragedy that befell it. Another phantom disappeared in the wilderness. Carl had seen what happened to it too.